academics, investors, and policymakers, and all that in order to contribute actually to the emergence of a truly circular, zero-waste, and non-toxic economy that has prevention and reuse at its core. I coordinate as well the Reuse Vanguard project, which will be presented to you by my colleague Larissa, and which aims at helping the EU to transition from single-use to reusable packaging in key market segments. And lastly, also to mention that I'm on board and co-coordinating the business leg of the We Choose Reuse campaign, which was initiated by the European civil society movement called Break Free from Plastic last year, and through which we have gathered around the support of around 300 businesses from Europe to ask policymakers to help our society embrace reuse. I'm very glad to be moderating this webinar. In terms of the topic, we have today's topic, it's mostly about packaging, but also more precisely about reusable packaging. And the way we use packaging in Europe has wide room for improvement. I think we could all agree on this. While we know that the overwhelming majority of packaging in the market loses over 95% of its value after the first use, and the last decades have brought about an unprecedented increase of packaging use and a decline in packaging reusability and recyclability as well. And so we have a context of increasing public attention, the urgency to decarbonize our economies and to move towards a circular use of resources and materials. And then the clear limitations of single-use packaging are therefore being exposed nowadays. And reusable packaging is now standing quite high on the agenda of policymakers and key market players. This is quite clearly demonstrated by, I think, the broad range of actors who have shown interest in joining today and registered for this webinar. So thank you all, by the way, for joining. And some of the biggest questions, I think, which remain to be touched upon, and we will use this webinar to do so, is the where and the how to start this transition to circularity when the entire, actually, retail sector is still designed and wired to work with single-use packaging. Hence, we have designed this webinar to go into greater depth to address the following questions. I'll mention just 4 of them. What packaging materials are the most suitable from an environmental and economic perspective? Then why reuse makes so much sense and which market segments should be prioritized to properly initiate the transition? Then we will go into where do we start this transition in the first place? And then what can the EU do to ensure that upcoming legislation pieces actually effectively support the reuse transition and give the right long-term signals that so many actors such as cities, businesses, industry players, and investors are so much eager to receive. Our speakers today are Larissa Coppello from Zero Waste Europe. We have also Tobias Bielenstein from the cooperative of the German mineral water companies, GDB in Germany. Then we have Gérard Bellet as well from Jean Bouteille, and also president of the board of the newly created New European Reuse Association, or New ERA. I will go into further introduction and details while passing the floor to one and each of you. But just a few logistical aspects as well. So each speaker will present for about 10-15 minutes maximum, and then after every presentation, we'll have a round of 5 minutes for clarifications, questions between them and myself. And then at the end of these presentations and questions, we will then have the final 25-30 minutes. Let's see how it goes for joint Q&A and discussion with all the speakers. Regarding the webinar tools, most of you are now, I'm sure, quite familiar with them. We have the chat box, so feel free to introduce yourself using the chat function, and I see quite a few of you are doing so. We have then, when it comes to questions, the possibility to submit your questions via the Q&A tool. Please do so via this so that we can follow up afterwards with the speakers at the time of doing so. Since the webinar platform we use actually can have a maximum capacity of 100 participants, we're also streaming it on YouTube. And those joining via YouTube can submit the questions in the chat there as well. So without further delays, let's start this exciting discussion with our first speaker. So Larissa, who you are well, first of all, my colleague, and then you are the Consumption Production Campaigner and Policy Officer at Zero Waste Europe. And within the CNP program, you work with upstream solutions to avoid creating waste in the first place, and doing a lot of advocacy work, and also promoting reusables all over the place and as much as possible, as well as zero-waste business models. And then your key areas of work include single-use plastics, packaging, including reusables, menstrual products, and nappies as well. And some of us may remember how well you led some of the campaigns on that front as well. You're a zero waster at heart, we all know that, and we know how much you enjoy as well running those campaigns and empowering people towards sustainable consumption patterns. So welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nathan. Nice introduction. Hello, everyone. So I'm just going to share my screen here. I think you can all see it. Let me put in its presentation mode. Slide. Yes. It's okay? You can see it? Great. So I'm happy to be here today because we're also launching our new campaign called Get Back Today, which focuses on the importance of developing appropriate reuse infrastructure in key market segments and how policy intervention is key to make it a reality. We are almost reaching 7 years after the first European Circular Economy Roadmap, and reusable packaging is not yet properly incentivized or regulated at the EU level. So I think you all know there's an ongoing revision of the packaging legislation at the EU level, and this is an opportunity to address this. And I'm glad to lead you the way on how this can happen. Okay. So I invite you to come on this beautiful rainbow of change with me. Currently, we are living in a context where there's an increasing public attention decarbonizing our economies and moving towards circular use of materials. And when it comes to packaging, there are a lot of limitations on single-use packaging that you know about. And the benefits of reusable packaging are now being looked at and considered by policymakers and also many businesses. However, the big question is where and how we can start this transition when the whole packaging system is designed and wired to work in a single-use packaging. So just like you cannot run trains or roads, you cannot run reuse in a system designed for single use. For instance, imagine the idea of running a train on roads designed for cars. It will be not efficient. So this is why reuse can never compete with single use using linear economies infrastructure. So our campaign, we say that it's time to get back to the good reuse practice that preceded the boom of single-use packaging and ensure that we use resource in a sustainable and circular way. So it's all about finding the right starting point for this transition, and step by step, we're going to build the legal and economical and physical structure that will allow reusable packaging to become competitive and mainstream again. So I'd like to present the findings of this research phase of one of our biggest reuse projects. It's called Reuse Vanguard project, or RSVP, which is a multi-layer European project being carried out together with key partners, organizations across 5 member states, namely Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, Spain, France, and the EU level as well. So basically, the research points out concretely to how to accelerate the transition to reuse systems, what is needed in terms of legislative framework, and which packaging segments we should start with. There's a lot of, still a broad lack of data availability for many packaging segments, which makes it hard to prepare a roadmap to implement reusable packaging where it makes sense. However, from what is possible to access, the reports aim at concretely identifying these packaging segments, and in terms of their environmental impacts, the feasibility and conditions for replacing single-use for reusable packaging. Now a kind of complex slide, but not be carried out. I will go through with you. In order to identify the packaging segments, so the research went through from a list of over 230 products, which is called from the list is called Classification of Individual Consumption According to Purpose, so COICOP. And from that list, we have narrowed down according to selected criteria until from 20 products to 7 products and then 5 products or packaging segments. Basically, the criteria, as you can see, was the availability implementation of reusable alternatives, comparing to single-use, the feasibility of presenting presently common single-use packaging by reusable alternatives, the material which are made of these products, and the impact of the material, and as well share in total household expenditures. So from the 20 products that we have it reach out from this criteria, we have it cluster them in 5 categories, which is beverage, e-commerce, takeaway, and retail. And the study was divided into 2 parts, and you can see the quantitative assessment, which mapped the packaging landscape in terms of their consumption, packaging weight and material, environment impacts, and waste recycling and litter rates. And the qualitative assessment, which was done for the 7 final products, in terms of the possibility to shift into single-use to reusable products. So let me start the details about the first part. On the quantitative quantification for the product, we start the consumption quantification. And so you can see this is the quantification for beverages. And it's applied to 2019 as the base year and covers for the EU. So you can see in 2019, almost 15 million tons of single-use beverage packaging was consumed in the EU. Because of some confidentiality on regarding data for the beverage sectors, the data is on weight. It's based on weight, so you can see it's tons. For the second packaging category, it's takeaway food and beverage. The consumption is in units, and you can see in 2019, more than 17 billion units of takeaway packaging for warm drinks were consumed and disposed, and over 16 billion units of takeaway meals, packaging for meals was consumed in the EU, 2019, yes. For the e-commerce, also on units, you can see that 60 billion units of packaging, including cardboard, paper, and plastic, were used in postal service in the EU. A bit on the quantitative assessment. So as mentioned before, the quantify the consumption of packaging that was explained was the basis for quantifying the weights as well of their single-use packaging, the materials they are made of. As you can see from the graphs, or maybe not, it's a bit complex, but I can explain. The products with glass packaging represent far as the largest weights. Highest weight is also visible for cardboard packages. And although plastic is one of the most materials for packaging nowadays, it has not biggest weight because of its lighter composition. It's the same case for aluminum packaging. So the material weights are indications for the resources needed to produce these products, but not on the environment impacts. We're going to look at the environment impacts now. The next slide. So for the packaging material and the associated environment impacts, the conversion factors looked in the research was based on weight, of packaging material produced. So they directly show how different packaging materials compare for as per kilogram in terms of the energy use, the global warming, aerification, land use, and water consumption. So that was the 5 analysis of the environment impact we've done on the 20 products. And the study has found out that the packaging materials with higher energy use, specifically single-use glass and aluminum, are the ones with the greatest environmental impacts associated. So in other words, there is a strong correlation between the energy used for packaging materials and the environmental pressures or impacts associated with those materials. Although it has been really logical and necessary to address single-use plastic, we have been underestimating the impact of other packaging materials as well, as you can see. Therefore, from the 20 products analyzed that has the highest environmental impacts, the beverage sector and e-commerce sector has the highest environmental impacts associated, but also due to the higher consumption rates as well that we have seen in the previous slides. On the quantitative assessment for the end of life of packaging, so packaging recycling. We now have statistics available on the recyclability of packaging, Eurostat, for instance, but most available are really inaccurate and differ greatly between countries according to their recycling capacity and calculation methods. So this is due to many reasons. So the calculation method for recycling differs country to country. The most common calculation is based on weight, and therefore is excluding losses of sorting and cleaning. A separate collection for recycling does not mean that the packaging is really effectively recycled, that we know. And we have also some some statistics about the waste trade work. So 1/3 of plastic packaging is actually destined for recycling is shipped outside of the EU. I think 75% indeed. And as well, most of single-use plastic packaging placed in the EU market is made of complex materials, and which makes it difficult for them to be recycled at the end. As well, the statistics that we have on recycling do not take account littering. So there's a lot of questioning about the recycling statistics that we have nowadays. At the end, for the second part of this research was the qualitative assessment. We defined the priority sectors to transition to reuse based on the quantitative assessment, so the packaging consumption, their environment impacts, and their recycling rates. So according to the research, we should start with beverages, takeaway, food and drinks, and e-commerce, which are the sectors that are already en route to deliver reuse and offer the biggest potential to increase their reuse rates in the coming years. So doing developments on these sectors can create the infrastructure needed in order to have the other packagings as well going for reusable in the future. So just going a bit more in detail on the beverage sector, from the qualitative assessment, it has been clear that it's the one most developed sectors when it comes to refillable packaging at the EU. Reusable options for many of beverages can be already found in almost all member states at the EU level. Although the refillable share of the market has dropped significantly over the last decade, the beverage sector already has a know-how, as well as the entire infrastructure of collection, washing, refill, delivered, and operates through DRS systems most of the time. Another factor to invest on refill and reuse for beverage sector is their great benefits for the environment. So this is two examples that I put from a study we did on the life cycle assessments of packaging materials. So as you can see, reusable glass bottles produce 85% less emissions than single-use ones, 70% less emissions than PET bottles, single-use PET, and 57% less emissions than single-use aluminum cans. And you can see there's a great potential as well for reusable HDPE bottle, but could be also a reusable plastic bottle comparing to single-use ones. So on reusable packaging for takeaway food and beverage, so it's largely existing and growing in the EU, as you can see, but under different business formats, designs, ownership, logistics, but the technologies for takeaway and reusable of food and beverage is already largely piloted across the EU. And here I'd like to show another example of how reusable packaging provides waste savings and energy savings and waste consumption and CO2 emissions as well. So this data that you have seen presentations from a study that we have published last year. And there we have analyzed the potential benefits of three key sectors, including takeaway, food and beverage. And you can see a lot of savings, not only from the environment perspective, but also from the cost savings. Same thing for the e-commerce sector. So e-commerce sector, they grew by 31% from 2019 to 2020, but we don't have the data from last year's, but we know that due to the pandemic, it's likely that it has even expanded even more. So the technology for e-commerce reuse packaging is already existent and already in use in some member states as well. And there are several companies providing these solutions for the sector. So the findings on e-commerce packaging, also from the same study mentioned for the takeaway, you can see reuse is not only good for the environment, but also for business pockets as well. This is a bonus slide that I'm not sure I'm able to go through. So at 080, we have produced many case studies about solutions and successful reusable packaging systems in Europe. And last year we have done the story of Rewine, which are reusable wine systems in the Catalan region. We also highlight the story of Repack, the reusable system for e-commerce, and Recircle, which is started with takeaway food containers, but they have grown as well for beverage takeaway. And I'm sure they will be sending in the chat the links to this case studies for you to go through more in depth. So basically, a big barrier for reuse is really having being a leader system wired for disposability. So today, the cost of entry for reuse startups is too high, and the competition to subsidize the linear infrastructure, it's really unfair. So new infrastructure is really needed to be able to channel big volumes and make reuse mainstream again. So this is why the state needs to intervene to provide public good and the systems with clear rules and allows different companies to operate in the market. So as we say with this campaign, that reuse infrastructure should be provided as a public good. Now finalizing, almost at the end. I hope I am not out of time because that's the biggest part, the most important part, is how the legislation can support this transition. We have a detailed policy briefing on all of this, but I will give in general what we want to see in there and to support reuse to be scaled up. Well, first thing, we need to put a cap on single-use packaging. That's for sure. Reduction of single-use packaging needs to happen. As well, what's really important, setting reuse targets. So sector-specific reuse targets or dedicated targets by packaging types, for instance, are one of the key elements for this transition. APR scheme, so there's the eco-modulation fees, or APR, as already been implemented through the Waste Framework Directive. But even more, we want to the fees of APR schemes to support the transition to reuse as well. So we propose a kind of fund for change, which would be that some fees, for instance, 10% at least of the APR fees to finance reuse infrastructure. And of course, we need some levies on single-use packaging. So for instance, they should pay a minimum fee of 10 cents per unit. What else? We need to support the implementation of reuse and refill systems, and that DRS plays a big role. DRS is a common denominator of most successful collection systems. And all of them include a deposit return scheme for guaranteeing the return of the packaging for reuse. So we really need to encourage member states to implement DRS beyond single use, beyond only recycling, and go for refill and reuse as well, and incorporate in the system as soon as possible, since the early stage of the implementation of DRS. Also, we need rules that guarantee the interoperability and scalability of the solutions. So we need a system capable of accepting different providers without changing the experience of consumers, and that's where manageable systems would play a role. I think Tobias will go more in detail about what we mean by manageable systems, because he will give his example of his business that on that. And other specific recommendations, for instance, would be that refillable alternatives should be made available and taken back by any restaurant, coffee, or shop selling food and drinks or on the go. And as well, any retailer selling food should accept that consumers bring their own container. So that's the infrastructure is really needed, but also accepting bring your container as well is important. So I think I finalize here. I'm pretty sure I went over time. I'm so sorry for that.
Thank you very much, Larissa. Slightly over time. Slightly over time, but it's fine. The presentation was very much holistic, so we don't need to go too much into the details of your presentation right now, and leave it open for participants to chip in as well with some questions. But just maybe very quickly, just picking up on one of the case studies that you worked on and that Series Europe released a few months ago, because you pointed out that there were 3 case studies which are pretty much aligned with the sectors that we are advocating for as well for market intervention. So maybe pointing out on the one on wine and the case studies on the Rewind project, which is actually an EU funded program, right, project. How does it fit in the whole picture? What are the key learnings from that project? Maybe because we know that wine is actually wine bottles are actually among the top 5 that you pointed out in your presentation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So Rewind was a really successful project actually in Catalonia. They started in Catalonia, and the government is really keen to amplify the project across the whole country in Spain, due to its how it was successful. So it actually was really complex and big. So it involved more or less 100 stakeholders, from wineries, restaurants, logistic operators, the waste collections, municipalities' waste collections, as well as washing plants available there. It lasts for 4 years. I think started 2016 to 2020. From the findings, I think a lot of CO2 emissions reduced, but if only reusing a glass bottle 8 times. I think they had an agreement with the wine operators, for instance, that to only reuse the bottles 8 times for aesthetic reasons, but the reusable glass bottles could be reused up to, I think, 31 more times. But even only reusing 8 times, they already could save, I think, up to 3 kilos of CO2 per bottle, something like that. Another finding that is good to highlight here is that among the many incentives to return the packaging, so they addressed was like vouchers scheme, reward, and DRS, like where you pay a deposit. So the DRS was the most effective way of guaranteeing the return of bottles, and had, I think, was up to 95% return rate. And one last thing was the distance between the washing facility and the winery. I think was really important. regarding the optimizing the logistics and of course saving emissions on that.
Thank you very much. I think that's a good introduction for the topic of Tobias' presentation. Pool systems. I think one of the key findings was that actually working in a pool system was much more beneficial to those willing to make the bottles reusables in Spain. So Tobias, just a quick introduction on you. You are the Director of Public Affairs, Sustainability and Communications of the Cooperative of the German Mineral Water Companies, GDB in German, is that correct? Yes, which runs actually Europe's biggest refillable bottle system with more than 1 billion bottles and more than 100 million crates. You're also the COO of the working group Refillables, Arbeitskreis Mehrweg, an organization managing the European Refillable logo and serving as a think tank and information point about refillables for companies, startups, authorities, and scientists as well. Tobias, the floor is yours.
Okay, so just let me share. So can you see my slides now? Okay, so let's get started. My presentation is titled whether our refillable bottle systems in Germany could be a model for pool systems in Europe. And so as a kind of disclaimer, I have to say, if we talk about the German market, we have to think about the special structure we have here, which is we have more than 1,300 breweries. We have 180, or actually a little more than 180 mineral water bottlers, more than 400 soft drink producers. German consumers are buying most of their beverages in crates and also return them in crates. We have a very, very diverse structure regarding retail, which helps a lot for beverages. So basically, this is not the answer to my initial question, whether the German model could serve as a role model for Europe. But definitely, when we talk and compare of what can be learned from Germany, we always have to be aware of this structure here. Now, GDB, we are a cooperative, which basically means our customers are our owners. That's why we call ourselves also kind of a non-profit business. We're actually out there for more than 80 years. And actually, we are managing the systems, but we also, as a cooperative, buying and selling everything a beverage company needs to produce beverages. We are a rather small by staff, but this means you can manage big systems with quite a few people if you have a good system in place. So if we look to the market, actually the share of GDB within the mineral water market, which consists of mineral waters and carbonated soft drinks, is 41%. And the others are all other single-use individual systems. I come back to that later on. And if we talk about it in terms of fillings, it's last year it's roughly 6.2 billion fillings, so bottles filled. And it's glass reuse, it's PET reuse. And we have a special bottle system called Logicycle. It's also a glass reuse system, and actually a small part of our business is also a PET circular system consisting of reusable crates and single-use bottles. If we look into the market share of reuse in the mineral water market, our share is more than 70%. It's roughly 72%, which basically means in our market in Germany, 72% of all the bottles are pool bottles. And what a pool bottle is, I will come back to that in a few minutes. But that's roughly the market share here, and Nathan already mentioned it's more than 1 billion bottles. Actually, consumers are very familiar to our bottles, and so it's also a brand. And the system is in place since 1969, but it's consistently developing. So the newest bottle introduced came in 2018. And the map here on the left shows that the structure, which basically means everywhere where you see a dot, there is a mineral water company filling bottles in Germany, GDB bottles. Now, if we come to the system, if we start talking about pool systems and reuse, we always have to think about two things. It's reuse, which is a container or a crate or whatever, and it's a system. And actually, Larissa just mentioned when she talked about the Rewind project about the many stakeholders involved. And that's the case. So the system is not only a question of a technical system, it's also a system of stakeholders like retail partners. In Germany, the grocery retailers play an important part. Also, consumers are part of the system. And so we always have to think about all these stakeholders within the system and the technical aspects and reuse. So this is very important. Now, the second feature of reuse, of course, actually a reuse system always is a zero waste system by default, because if we manage it well, after a bottle is ejected, ideally it will be recycled, fully recycled, no matter whether it's a glass bottle or a PET bottle. And the story here is, if it's managed within a reuse system, it's already sorted. So the bottles returning are already pre-sorted. It's a high quality recycling material and so on. So I always mention this because I say it's one of the best ways to think about zero waste systems, because it's a double circle. It's not only reuse, it's also recycle. Now, reuse system, and I jump through this rather quickly, is what I'm talking about here is what Ellen MacArthur Foundation calls return from home and return on the go. So systems you buy by delivery retailers or in a store. And it's packaging, that's also very important. And if we think about packaging, it's not just reuse. And by the way, if you look at the top of the slide, there is this reuse refill thing. And actually, I would be happy if we one day can agree on a consistent terminology here. Maybe that's an invitation to the Commission also to come up here with clear definitions, because it helps. Because I tend to use the term refill because it makes clear it's the same packaging refilled several times. So if we, and at this slide, I know it's very complicated, but once I guide you through this, you will understand everything regarding reuse. So of course, the first question is, if you have a container, is it made of PET glass? Is it a can or a PP or whatever? And there are, of course, questions associated to this. For example, in Germany, it's almost impossible to sell a beer in a PET bottle. So it's given that you have to use glass or maybe a can. And then the next question is it single use or is it refillable? And again, there are several questions associated with this. So for example, it could be a strategic question of a company. It could also be a question of consumer preferences. In Germany, again, a consumer wouldn't buy, or they are very keen to have their beer in reusable glass bottles. But also some retailers, they don't list reuse bottles. So this is also a question. And for example, glass is associated with high quality for many products. Think of wine and so on. And again, you have to consider here, is it single use or refillable? But refillable now again could be an individual or a pool system. And Individual system means it's one company running its own reuse system. And pool means, and this is what many people also call a standardized system, is a system used by many companies using the same bottle, the same packaging, which basically means you have to cooperate with your competitors in order to run such a system. And then we are not done yet. Pool system could be either managed or unmanaged. And the story here is actually, for example, the beer market in Germany is an unmanaged system so far, but they are reintroducing a managed system here. So basically our prediction is, because it's producing quite some inefficiencies, I'm pretty sure in a few years we won't see any unmanaged pool systems because it's just too expensive. So in future, I think we are only going to talk about managed pool systems. And actually our system is, for many people, kind of a prototype. Now, what qualifies such a managed pool system? The point here is this kind of pool system, it needs governance, and it needs an institutionalized form of governance. Think again, we are talking about cooperation among competitors. This means clear rules, and it needs a legal framework. For example, the ownership of the bottles, the type of cooperation, how to manage inclusivity in order to open the system for all players interested in being part of it. We need internal standards. How about inputs and ejects of the bottle in order to keep the quality high? Clearing activities, reporting is very important. And this is crucial to everything you do in these kind of systems, conditions to ensure the free movement, which basically also mean, for example, rules for labeling. Because if you are using the wrong labels, this would hinder free movement if they are not washed up after a trip. So all these kind of rules have to be integrated in such a system. And of course, it also means a fair distribution of cost and benefit. And all this together makes up a system. And if you are running it well, this produces quite a few advantages. The most of these advantages are actually improved efficiency. Actually, I have to say, big individual systems, actually, they follow the same rules. And they could be also the same level of efficiency. But the point here is, if you have small players, big players, and all together in one system, and you want to spread out reuse in such a system on a broad scale, you will have to consider the small and medium-sized companies. This is the highest efficient way to do it. And it means also lower costs and lower risks. Think now, a time where resource prices are rising. If you are running a system like we do, it's lower risk in economic terms. I talked about SMEs, and it also means, if you have a clear governance system, open access for different producers of the containers. So if you have a standard set for the system, it means you can have different partners in the supply chain in order to deliver into the systems. So there is also competition integrated in the system. And of course, it has the best potential for scalability, so growing. Just a sentence, I won't go too deep in this slide, but the message here is we did a huge study on comparing different types of packaging, because usually it's said, and I call it a myth, that reuse is more expensive than single use. To put it short, it's wrong. It depends, definitely. So you can run, of course, single-use system on a very efficient way, but you can also run reuse systems and pool reuse systems on a very efficient way. And we identified a lot of rivals. The result here of this study, and we actually checked the numbers again last year, it's still valid that pool systems especially can be as competitive in terms of costs as any other packaging system. One more aspect, talking about pool systems and standardizing doesn't mean uniformity. It's important actually to have many different sizes of bottles, also shapes, depending on what kind of beverages you have. And this is just part of our system, which consists of glass and PET from sizes ranging from 0.3 liter to 1.5 liter. This is only a small part of the market. So there are more carbonated soft drinks, beer, juices, who still have their own reuse bottles, also in the standardized pool system. And this is very important. And it's also important to have this variety, because there's one, that's almost the final slide, important secret about any kind of reuse system. It has to be simple to consumers. It really has to be as simple as possible for consumers. And this also means I want to have bottle size, for example, I'm used to. And for example, we know, for example, for mineral water, it's quite in Germany, usual to have 0.75 or 1 liter bottles. If it's single use, you have the 1.5 liter bottles, but only for non-carbonated water. So, and this means that you have to have all these variety of packaging, and still they are very efficient and very well running. So this all together leads to, well, a kind of conclusion where I say refillable systems, they definitely have to follow local, regional, and by regional I mean also include national needs and consumer habits. So the one size fits all approach for all everywhere in Europe wouldn't work. But we can learn a lot, and we are really happy to share this knowledge from the systems we are running here in Germany and transfer it to other European countries. And we're actually doing this already here and there. And also to think about Europe-wide systems, because this is also part of the solutions I'm pretty sure we are looking into. And well, finally, but I think that's also something Nathan could and Larissa could also talk about. There will be an upcoming policy briefing, which puts together many of the things we said here, and we had quite some good discussions on that. So there is more to be said about the systems, but I stop here for the moment.
Thank you very much, Tobias. In terms of timing, maybe 1 minute. Can you summarize the 3 key essential criteria you think should be used for Europeans to move towards a system that is harmonized around well-managed pool systems? Because we know it's a key leverage point that we need to activate if we want to move forward with that transition, correct?
I mean, the most important thing, and that's something I already touched on, is really we need to have always this institutionalized governance structure. Otherwise, it will not work. And this has to integrate quite a few aspects regarding ownership, regarding the form of cooperation, and so on. So I would say governance structure, I would say standards. And by the way, this is my opinion, the standards should be developed by retail industry producers, because they are the nearest to the consumers. So they are nearest to market, and they are also those who can adapt and well, further develop the standards in the fastest and best way. And finally, it needs definitely a fair distribution of costs and benefits. I hope you can agree to that.
Thank you so much. Moving on with Gerard now for the second time, and then opening up with a Q&A with the public, with the audience. So Gerard, you are the founder of Jean Bouteille, a French company whose business model is entirely or very near zero waste, and it combines a bulk system and a refillable bottle system. Your company works with the retail outlets to offer the opportunity for citizens to incur reuse practices as well in their daily lives. So you do a lot of awareness raising as well. And then Gerard, you also, and that's a news that we're sharing today, you're also the president of the board of the New European Alliance, or the acronym is New Era, a not-for-profit association which was created by 9 European companies that offer reusable packaging solutions, system services, and all products in key market segments. So Gerard, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share our views, and thank you very much for the very rich presentation of Larissa and Tobias. That was very instructive and very inspiring, and see the way forward. So I will start with Jean Bouteille, a quick presentation, and then we'll move on what we want to achieve with New Era. So I have a small presentation that I will just share here. I can partager here. Partager. Okay. So Jean Bouteille is a 8-year-old company now, trying to solve a waste problem for liquid products. As presented before, there are already large solutions in some countries with a deposit scheme on food, on beverages, sorry, but it doesn't really exist for oil, for wine, for vinegar, for laundry, for soap, for mustard, etc. And so we have created a new way of consuming, that is selling in bulk a product in a refillable container. So the container can be cleaned at home and then reused. So we are 35 people in the company. We are in more than 1,400 shops and in 34 different countries, with some pretty steady growth for the past 5 years. Even last year, which was a very particular year, we had like almost 20% growth. We achieved maybe 50% growth, so the year before. We are mainly focused on supermarket as of now, and we are more and more going to new markets like concept stores, like L'Occitane en Provence, or like pharmaceutical pharmacy, and we want also to go to takeaway and catering, where you have a lot of waste too. We also have an entire division working with brands. We know that consumptions is also a lot marketed by brands who show their product and try to prove their product are the best, and we cannot fight without the brands. So we want to work with the brands so they can have their product in a zero waste manner, and they will help us to find the proper way to sell it in the mass market, in the supermarket. Supermarket is really like a jungle. You have a lot of promotion, you have a lot of pack, you have a lot of marketing on the bottle. The bottle is very it's a very easy item to market, and it's very hard for large brand to change their packaging and go to standards deposit system. So we help them by reusing their packaging with a refill system. So we did some large deployment with L'Occitane, with Ecover, with Mustela, and we have many brands that are under study or ongoing with deployments. Here, our goal is to help the entire market understand what's the regulation, how we can do it in terms of hygiene, and how we can offer an alternative to the single-use packaging. Because in fact, the main problem is single-use packaging drive a lot of waste. It's highly you have a lot of CO2 consumptions, and you have this plastic problem. A lot of companies have tried to resolve the CO2 problem with the carbon footprint problem with some thinner plastic, but that come with single use that have their own problem. And so that's why we want to pursue with some innovation, going to skincare product, going to dairy product, going to jam and condiments into catering, where the first consumer of the single dose ketchup is the bin, because people take like 3-pack and just throw it away at the end. So it creates a lot of waste here. So we are in France, which is a very active market in terms of, and I will stop the sharing. How do I do that here? So we are in France, where it's very active in terms of zero waste innovation, and shops want to propose some new solution very often. And we are trying to connect with other companies in Europe to try to be stronger, to try to push things faster, and that's why we launch a new era. So it's an alliance of reuse-oriented company who want to prove that there is another model than the single-use packaging, because single-use packaging is very, very efficient. It has been industrialized for the past 30 years, and it has logistic that is used to single use. It has shoppers that are used to single use, and supermarkets. So we want to show, to prove, to incentivize, and also to discuss with legal authorities about how we can change some aspect of the market, so we have a space for industrialization, because we can prove our model is right today, but it's very fragile. We can see that with the COVID situation, when we stopped being into confinement, into lockdown, people stopped going where we were mostly sold. So we had some difficulties moving on, and the single-use plastic totally took back its part. And so we are very fragile, and we want to show that together we can be stronger, and there is a strong way for reuse in the next couple of years. For that, we need the help of the cities, we need the help of the regulation, we need the help of the large brands who need to invest into this way of consumption. Not looking at the initial cost, because it's definitely an investment. Otherwise, it will be always too expensive. It will be always not enough return on investment, and it will always too much trash that they don't have to deal with.
Thank you very much, Gerard.
Maybe I can.
Are you done?
Yeah.
Or
yeah.
you
Maybe I can
continue?
just show the founder of. So I took the website where it is. Yes, it's here. I can maybe share just the first company who created the new era quickly. So yes. There is for sure me, but there are other companies than me. So let me try to find out. It's here. So you have Up, who is a reusable packaging for e-commerce. You have also a Recap, who has large have various containers that can be reused in very many different occasions, so events or catering or offices. You have Recycle. The website is going again. Sorry. So it's also on the catering, how we can do food delivery with the loop, with the container. You have Boomerang, who do the same, and there are a lot of innovation into the food delivery, because there is a lot of market and there is a lot of growth into the takeaway and the delivery and the food delivery. So that's us, Jean Bouteille. There is also Super Zero, who is a Belgian company who do equipment for bulk liquids. So it's a confrère, as we say. It's a company that do similar thing than us, but with some different approach. And Simi, who is a company who do reusable, who do soap and hygiene product in reusable packaging. And Repack, who do also reusable packaging for e-commerce. So it's a large variety for consumer, for supermarket, but not only. We want to try to influence all type of legislation to make reuse part of the future of every aspect of our life.
Very interesting point, Ja, is that these companies are quite different, right? Some are scaled up already. We know about Recup, for instance, Reusable, that have, I think, above 11,000 point of sales, I think, across Germany, which is something completely different. It makes a very different environment to navigate in compared to their equivalent in Spain, Boomerang, for instance, where takeaway reusable containers are actually quite embryonic. So that means that people like those companies are willing to come together, actually, because there is something that federates them, right? And that's why you came together in the first place. Could you just give me a hint, really in 1 minute, 1 minute and a half, what are the key constraints that you're facing and that you want legislators, cities maybe as well, to step in, and help you actually to go to another level, another scale that what you are stuck in for the time being?
That's a very good question. When we do study and we go to see clients and consumer, they always welcome our initiative and they always want to consume this way, but they see it more as a constraint than as something they can do in their daily life, because single use is so practical, and because single use is everywhere. And finally, the most difficult part for us is to prove them that they can find us in different places, and so they can make their new habits. Reuse packaging is a habit. When we talk about some German people and we say we put our glass bottle into some bins, they say why? It's like completely illogical, and they will never be able to do it because they have these habits for the past like all their life span to do it this way. So they don't understand us. And on contrary, when we tell people, yeah, you will have to bring back your container, they always say, yes, I would love, but it's not a habit. So they lose it very easily, and then it becomes a constraint. And when it's a constraint, you don't succeed to have buying power. Buying power is made on wish. You want to buy, and it's not a constraint. So the difficulty here is how we can scale up to make it practical, and how can we convince brands and supermarket that if you don't take your part, then there is no issue. And then, okay, let's assume together that there is no other way to do it. It's possible, but it's more a political aspect of it. It's, are we as a European civilization willing to say, okay, let's let the world like this, it's not our problem? Or are we willing to say we need to take our part as a city, as a supermarket, as a retailer, as a brand, and so as a legislator, to say we need a civilization choice here on how we want to handle packaging, because otherwise it will always be seen as a constraint, even if there is example that it's not anymore a constraint in some countries where it has been for a long time.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Gerard. I'm now shifting my attention to the Q&A box as well, and we'll try to dispatch a little bit some of the questions that we have received in that box. So maybe I'll start with the last one, actually. A question from Brenda Platt. So how does distance between consumers, retailers, return place, and bottle washers factor into success? Can refillable bottle systems work in areas where things are more spread out geographically? Who wants to take that? Maybe Tobias, you want maybe to step in.
Well, I can answer on our experience, actually, that many of the companies in our system, they are pretty remote because they are in regions where you have beautiful nature and so on. So and still they are very efficient because transport distances are rather small due to the shared bottle. But I would, on a more general level, say logistics are really developing very well in the last years, and I'm pretty sure also in the upcoming years. So it's still important to think about limiting transport distances, but I'm not sure whether this will be our biggest issue if we transform our society more towards carbon neutral logistics and so on. So I think that this, if we look into the next 10 years or in the next 20 years, the picture might change, but still, if, for example, if we think about glass reuse systems, it's definitely a point. But to answer the question, so I can't answer this by saying it's X or Y kilometers, but I can tell you the structure here and the interplay of the different stakeholders is crucial in order to limit the transport distances. And you saw the map of our producers. They are really all over the country. And actually in other systems, we are currently discussing to set up those kind of washing centers and so on. And the maps we are discussing look quite similar. So there is reason to think about decentralization in these structures, definitely.
So something just along those lines, and then maybe asking you, Larissa, whether you want to chip in on that, because I think that was part of one of the studies you coordinated as well. But just Tobias, how much do you plan to decarbonize the logistics of GDB in the next years, and how much have you already decarbonized the transportation system?
Good question. I don't have exact numbers. We're doing actually pretty much of what we do here is still in an experimental stadium, I would say. So, for example, we have cross retailers who started deliveries with trucks running on electricity. Yeah, it's possible. It's definitely possible, and the point here is because we have this structure where we have the producers, the gross retailers, and then retail, kind of a pyramid system where you can have the last mile definitely on electrical trucks, and there are more and more coming up. But I actually don't have numbers on that yet. Please ask me in 1 or 2 years again. And because it's something I'm working on to find out more, and because examples are good, KPIs are better here.
Thank you, Tobias. Larissa, do you want to chip in on that, or I'll move to the next question?
Yeah, briefly, I think Tobias already said about the logistics, it's really important. And on the studies we had last year as well, on the key parameters for successful reusable systems, is actually saying, so the production phase is one of the most important, then the use phase, which includes the transportation, then the number of reuse, the cycle of the product, then the end of the life. So definitely distance, etc. It's relevant, but it's not the only element that will determine the efficiency of reusable systems.
Thank you, Larissa. Just staying with you, actually, we have a question related to the RSVP project, so the Reuse Vanguard project that you introduced earlier in your presentation. And so the question is, have you analyzed in your project the differentiated potential of products and barriers to reuse in the beverage category, for example, soft drinks, beers, spirits, and wines, considering existing reuse market share, short, long supply chains, etc., etc.?
Yeah, so for the beverage category, for be one of the key sectors to be transitioned to reuse, we haven't really got into the deep detail about this, the percentage of the market share of this, but Reloop has a nice dashboard. I'm doing the promotion here. You're welcome, Clarissa. You can pass here the dashboard with where you can see actually the market share in Europe of refillables, and you can see the beer insiders are one of the highest market share. But also from the examples, because in the RSVP we have many stakeholders from this 5 member states that I mentioned, and including Spain. And for instance, for the example of Rewind project that I have shared, it's a definitely segment that has great potential. So it's, as I mentioned, it's being looked to be expanded in the entire country, not only Catalonia, because of the results. So yeah, although we haven't looked specifically on the potential of each beverage sector, so the beers, wines, I think it's overall, they all have great potential that needs to be explored on this.
Exactly. One other question here is, does the analysis of environmental impact assume virgin material use versus use of recycled content materials? Glass bottles, for instance, were made from 80% recycled cullet, consumes significantly less energy. Larissa, I think that's still for you.
Yeah. So this webinar here, we're focusing on reuse and how we can make this transition happen. It's really important. But of course, overall on the packaging recommendations and policy, definitely recycled content is also one of the key interventions as well, and measures that needs to be addressed for all packaging sectors. And yeah, indeed, could be improving separate collection, improving recycled content of glass bottles and even other types of materials is important, but also reuse about addressing resource scarcity as well. So we need to take that into account, that reuse is more beneficial. There are many proven resource and studies saying that for the environment as a whole. And I think so glass is really energy intense material. And I think for the recycling stage of glass, I think 80% is used to melt the glass being able to be recycled. So that can be a lot of environmental material benefits by shifting to reusable glass.
A question from Susana Fonseca from Ciro, Portugal. An argument against reuse we hear a lot in countries like Portugal, regularly affected by drought, is the water needed for cleaning the bottles or other reusable packaging. Studies you have presented clearly show the benefits on water usage from reusable solutions. So I was wondering if you have any insight sources on good resources we can use in these discussions to frame the discussion in a different way and clearly show that it's not the case. Who wants to take that in terms of water consumption for reusables? Maybe Gérard, you want to step in from a business perspective?
Maybe Tobias. Yeah,
Tobias.
we can, but maybe Tobias, they clean much more a variety of bottles than us. But what we can see is, depending on the efficiency of the equipment you have, you consume more or less energy, more or less water. And definitely you need to be sure you are in a place, and also you can recycle your water. Generally, you use the rinse water you use is used to wash the water, and then you change only a little bit of water. That's how you make sure the consumption of water is limited. And after, you need to be in areas where you can have access of water without changing the aspect, in fact, of the quantity, etc. That need to be managed. But how can I say? It's what do you prefer in your backyard? Do you prefer a landmark where you trash bins in the soil, or you prefer have a bottle of washer? You know, me personally, I prefer have a bottle washer near my house than something that burn trash or something that put trash under that trash into the landfill. It's because you don't see the impact. That doesn't mean there is no impact on the other solution. There is an impact in our consumptions, always. But
still there is a lot.
But there is much less impact in consuming water that you can regulate, that you can clean and put back into the system than having it burnt or having it into landfill, which are maybe what is done today in Portugal. I don't really know, but it's because you don't see it that you think there is no impact in doing it.
And there is a lot indeed to be done, or that it has been done already when it comes to maximizing water usage as well,
Sure.
to make sure that its impact is limited, right? So hence the need to develop scale and reuse infrastructure as well, washing plants in a way that makes sense.
If you have a 60 years old bottle washer, it definitely consumes too much water. But it's same for incinerator. It's same for everything.
Actually, that's also part of my answer. So we see if the newer equipment, also all the new equipment that brought into the market in the recent 2-3 years, they have a significant lower water consumption. But I think it's the wrong calculation if you start in like Gerard just said. If you start thinking about water usage that is considered to be high, but is actually very, very low, because per bottle we are using the washing water. So it's a closed circle in such a washing machine if it's modern equipment. By the way, and then all the standards come in, because you need the right labels in order to keep the washing machine operating with the same water for long times. So we are, if we dig deep into the technique, you understand why I'm talking about the system, because all those elements, they fit to each other, and it's very important here to really take a close and precise look to all of these details in order to have an ecological efficient system here running.
So closing on that question and reacting to another question that was actually focusing on the washing phase, is it efficient enough to secure a positive impact at this point in terms of reusables?
Yes.
So that's a clear yes. Thank you. Gerard, there is a question for you. I think it's the announcement that you're launching a new era is attracting attention. So Michael Whitley is asking how may other reuse companies join, and who should they contact? Is there an URL? I think you're planning to launch next week, correct?
Yes, we are planning to. We are in the late, in the last part to depose to drop the status and all. But definitely we welcome all type of company that have reuse at the heart of their offer, or at least that has reuse at the heart of one of their offering, and are willing to extend this offering to the other part. It will be a lot of small companies that we want to put voices on small companies, but we cannot put aside large companies who do clean a lot of bottles today, and we want them to help us putting reuse at the center of the offer of tomorrow. It's really, really important for us to make sure it's a systemic change that needs to be done on the entire offering. And it's not only small companies against big companies or things like that. But for sure, big companies don't need us to do lobbying with the European Union. It's just they don't need us less. We maybe need a bit more of them to be with us than something else. Let's see.
A question that I wanted to ask you, so just posing the Q&A box for a second. What brings to mind interoperability? It's a complex word, but actually it has very concrete applications, right? How do you see that as impacting the future of reuse, generally speaking, across the continent? That's for Gerard and others. You can start, Gerard.
Okay. For new era, it will be by looking at what legislation will come out in the next future and see if reuse packaging, but reuse spirit can be put somewhere to help new companies or new ideas pop up, and to make sure we succeed to take out some of the business as usual things that are done with single-use packaging. So that's why it's not only about packaging, it's about reuse in general.
Tobias, Larissa, do you want to step in on that? Larissa, maybe you were the...
Okay. I like a sentence that I think I heard a long time ago, but it's still accurate. It's there's no such a thing as a sustainable packaging, but a sustainable system. So I think the interoperability is about that. Really make sure that the system includes and compensates all the packaging materials of all sorts, and it's like streamlined and turbo logistics, reducing costs. I mean, there's many benefits of this, and Tobias has already shared from the example of his business, for instance. And I think it's key the policy for the packaging legislation, for instance, to have to address that, because we are building this new infrastructure for reuse, and this is the base for reusable systems to be efficient.
And so the idea is that since we start building this infrastructure, not from scratch, some countries like Germany actually have a well-established one, but in other countries it's starting from scratch. And so there is a need to make sure that we create it's all about the scalability we're looking at as well, to reduce cost and allow for that big takeoff that all of the actors are looking at when considering a transition towards reuse, right, Tobias?
Well, the point is, what do we consider of, if we talk about interoperability? So to give you one example, in Germany, we have actually an established DRS infrastructure, which is good for both single-use and reusable bottles and crates. And this system is actually also used since many years for yogurt jars made of glass reuse. And this system has been scaled up in the last 2-3 years. We had actually about 10 dairy companies in Germany using these glasses. Now we have more than 140 companies using this kind of reusable glass for many, many different products, food, beverages, all kind of foods. And the infrastructure is just the same. It's the reverse vending machine at the point of sale that's used. So this system, there is no invest needed in order to scale up a reusable system. So this is interoperability at the point of return, which is open. This is, to me, one of the examples. If we are talking about more DRS systems coming up in Europe, and if we talk about that this infrastructure probably will need reverse vending machines everywhere, let's start doing it right from the beginning, which means open up these systems not only for single-use beverage containers, but also for other stuff, if it's sustainable also in economic terms. This is also, of course, always a question of balance, but I think this is the way we should think if we think future-wise of setting up these systems. And we have good examples here of this system. By the way, it's just reset to introduce a management system on that, because it's a pool system, and the management system was actually not very well, and we are just setting up a new management system for these yogurt jars and so on. So there's a lot of things where we should think very pragmatically, how can it be used in the best way. And I think the question would be the same in France, Gerard, if we think about what's happening in the next 2 or 3 years, or in any other European country.
Just before concluding, because we have 5 minutes left and like a little time to wrap up as well. Gerard, maybe one last point: consumers, behavioral change, convenience. Can you make something up of that equation? How does it fit in? How much do you work on that? And yeah, what are the limits to the exercise as well? Maybe?
That's a very good point. We believe people want to be part of the solution. And in fact, if they don't care, they will never care. So we want to show that it's easy and simple, and so they can be part of it, and they will be proud of it. And that's where it brings back to consumption. Consumption is about happiness. It's about being feeling happy because I bought this product that reflects what I want. And so reuse packaging give more benefits than recycling it, because you see it, it's more concrete. And so it's more on that we want to drive. We want to show that it's a simple step that you can make, and you can ask your brand to make a big step to create the offering. And we want to make sure there is an alternative to single-use packaging everywhere there is single-use packaging. And that's how we will succeed to tell the consumer, do you want it in single-use or do you want it into reuse? Today, we don't offer the choice. In some countries where you don't offer the choice, only reuse, it works. You can have, I really like how Germany approached the deposit system for single-use packaging, for recycling. It's, you give the same constraint to single-use than for reuse, than for refillable. And so you don't have this bad competition between the two. So it's how can we make it more convenient with RSVP, for example, and also offering to have a large scale of product. And so it will be more about the product that is inside, more than just being unique by the approach and the system.
Thank you very much to the three of you. It was a very interesting conversation, and I hope that the registered participants, generally speaking, had the same pleasure that I had to listen to you. Just wrapping up quickly, Larissa, you started by setting the scene for the need for a powerful action to tackle packaging waste, and what is the expected contribution of reuse to this. So highlighting the need to focus on the why and where. I think that was pretty much key, and then you link that up as well with the crucial role that the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive is expected to play, because that's whereby people are expecting some strong signal as well as to what will happen and what sort of role do they need to play in that transition. Then we had Tobias focusing on the how, very important and attracting more and more attention. So Tobias, you shared the best practice from Germany, showing how reuse works effectively at scale. Very important, allowing us as well to better grasp the crucial importance of pool systems in making reuse the new norm in Europe, again, because that was the title of this webinar. And in a way as well that is systemic and harmonized, allowing therefore for broader market convergence across the EU single market as well. Gerard, your intervention nicely brought in the reuse business perspective into the discussion as well, highlighting your key role in the transition, you as a business and the reuse businesses that you're representing as well as part of New Era, because those businesses are very much eager to make their voice heard in the policy making processes, and not least at the EU, because we know how much important that is as well. And then the need to integrate the views of consumer, I think, was also mentioned, to make those reuse systems as convenient as possible for the majority of the population, and yet with some limits to that exercise as well, and the need to continuously rise the bar of ecological consciousness. And I think that's something we're all committed to today. So thank you so much. Very quick, yeah, I'm focusing now quickly on some last details. Check out, please, the tool sections where you'll find the presentations of today's speakers and many more resources. So that's a link that we can share in here as well. That will be available on the website very soon. And then sign up, obviously, to the city's newsletter, which is hosting this webinar, to know more about upcoming webinars, because there will be some more, as initially mentioned. Thank you so much, and have an enjoying rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.